The year was 1865, and the frontier lay stretched like an open wound across the land, raw, untamed, unforgiving. Clara Whitmore stood at the porch of her family's homestead, the last rays of the setting sun brushing the fields with gold. The air smelled of dust and wheat, her father's sweat, and the faint smoke of her mother's bread cooling on the table. For a moment, there was peace, though out here peace was always a fragile thing, like glass waiting for stone. Clara's father walked back from the barn, sleeves rolled, rifle slung carelessly over one shoulder, his face tired but proud. He tipped his hat to his daughter as though she were a grown woman, not the young girl still holding on to the edges of her childhood. Clara smiled back, but unease already gnawed at her stomach. The silence broke in thunder. Hoofbeats rose like a storm, rolling fast across the plains. Her father froze, eyes narrowing. He muttered a curse, then barked for them to get inside. Her mother grabbed Clara's wrist, dragging her toward the door. The riders appeared in the distance, dark shapes cutting through the light. They came fast, rifles flashing in the dying sun. The world shattered. Glass burst as bullets tore through the windows. Horses screamed in the barn. The roof caught fire as torches sailed through the air, flames licking greedily at dry wood. Her father fired back, shouting words she couldn't hear over the roar. Clara's breath came sharp, shallow, every muscle rigid. A raider burst through the door, eyes masked by a red scarf, his hands reaching like claws. Clara screamed, struggling, but his grip locked around her arm like iron. Her father spun, rifle raised, but a second shot rang out. He staggered back, blood spreading across his shirt. Clara's mother cried out, dropping to her knees to hold him. The raiders dragged Clara out as her home burned. She kicked, scratched, screamed until her voice broke. They only laughed, binding her wrists with cold chains that cut deep into her skin. Behind her, the house collapsed into fire, swallowing her mother's cry. Smoke and ash chased her into the night, carrying away the last of her world. The march was endless. The moon gave little light, only enough to show her the shapes of men who smelled of whiskey and blood. Her wrists throbbed. Her feet bled. She stumbled, pulled upright by the chain. No one spoke to her except to curse or mock. When dawn came, the town rose from the dust like a scar, buildings sagging under the weight of half-built dreams and half-kept promises. A saloon leaned against a trading post, both staring down the dirt street as though daring it to fight back. They hauled her onto a platform at the town center, chains rattling. The crowd gathered, faces curious, greedy, indifferent. The air was thick with sweat and tobacco, whiskey and want. She knelt on splintered wood, head high, though her body shook. An auctioneer in a broad hat shouted numbers, his voice cutting sharp through the murmurs. Bids came fast, each one worse than the last. One man grinned, boasting of what he'd do with her if the price was right. Another scoffed that she wasn't worth half the trouble. The crowd laughed. Clara's jaw tightened. She would not cry, not here, not for them. Then a boy's voice cut through the noise. "Pa, we can't let him." The crowd shifted. At the edge stood a man with broad shoulders and a weathered face, the kind of face carved by too many losses. Beside him clung a boy, no older than 8, holding a carved wooden horse as if it might protect him. The man's eyes met Clara's. In them, she saw no hunger, no cruelty, only a steady, unwavering strength. He stepped forward. A pouch dropped heavy onto the platform, coins clinking like thunder after lightning. Silence fell. The auctioneer raised his brows. "That's all you got, Cole. Leave you broke." The man, Ethan Cole, didn't blink. His voice was low, solid. "It's enough." The hammer dropped. So, they unlocked her chains, though not gently. Her wrists throbbed as the iron fell away. She staggered, catching herself on the boards. Dust stung her eyes. She looked up at the man who had bought her, her breath ragged, her heart pounding. And then she spat at his boots. "I don't need your pity." Laughter rippled through the crowd, sharp and mean. Ethan didn't move. He bent slowly, offering a hand she refused. His eyes held hers, steady, unflinching. "They took your world," he said quietly. Maybe I can help you find another." Clara glared at him, hatred and grief colliding in her chest. She saw the boy holding tight to his wooden horse, staring at her as if she weren't broken at all, but something worth saving. She turned her face away, unwilling to give in. Yet the words clung to her like smoke. The crowd dispersed, some muttering pity for Ethan, others mocking him for wasting coin on a ruined girl. He ignored them. He led her through the streets, his boy at his side, their shadows stretching long in the afternoon sun. Clara's wrists ached, her throat burned, and the memory of flames still seared her vision. She had nothing, no family, no home, no hope. Yet beside this man and his child, she felt a flicker, faint but undeniable. Rage, perhaps. Survival, perhaps. Or something she dared not name. The sun dipped low, shadows swallowing the town, and Clara walked on in silence. She did not trust him. She did not want him. But she knew this much. The frontier had taken everything from her, and for reasons she could not yet understand, this man had chosen to give something back. The morning after the auction, Clara woke to the sound of a fire crackling and the smell of coffee drifting through the thin air. She was wrapped in a coarse blanket, though she remembered refusing it the night before. Ethan Cole sat a short distance away, his back against a tree, eyes on the horizon. His son, Jacob, crouched near the fire, carefully turning strips of rabbit on a spit. Clara stirred, and Jacob glanced up, his small face bright with a smile that felt out of place in a world so cruel. She turned away from him, her pride like armor. Ethan spoke without looking at her. "You'll eat. It's a long road ahead." "I'll eat when I choose," she said, her voice hoarse but sharp. Jacob's smile faltered, but Ethan didn't rise to her anger. He only nodded, as though her defiance was expected. "Suit yourself, but don't fall behind." They set out soon after, the three of them on foot, with Ethan leading a mule laden with supplies. The wilderness stretched before them, endless and indifferent. Clara's wrists still bore red welts from the chains, and every step sent pain through her blistered feet, but she would not let them see her falter. She walked with her chin high, even when the sun burned and the dust clung to her skin. By midday, they reached a trading post perched at the edge of a dry riverbed. The place stank of sweat, gun oil, and suspicion. Men leaned against the porch rails, their eyes narrowing as the trio approached. Ethan guided Clara and Jacob inside, where shadows hung thick and voices dropped low. The air reeked of tobacco smoke and unwashed bodies. Clara stayed close to the door, refusing to look cowed, though every instinct told her danger was near. Ethan moved to the counter, trading coin for ammunition, dried meat, and coffee beans. Jacob clung to his father's side, the carved horse tucked into his belt. One of the men at the bar laughed, loud and sharp. "That the gal you bought up yesterday, Cole? Pretty thing, though she don't look broken yet." The others chuckled. Clara's cheeks burned, but she stood straighter, meeting their stares with cold defiance. Ethan's jaw tightened. Without a word, he collected his goods and guided his boy and Clara back toward the door. "Thought you had better taste," another man called, his hand drifting toward the revolver at his hip. The click of Ethan's Colt filled the silence before the insult could fester. "Best put that hand elsewhere, friend," he said calmly. His eyes, hard as steel, never wavered. The man sneered but dropped his hand, muttering into his whiskey. The trio stepped back into the daylight, tension trailing them like smoke. They traveled on, moving west into harsher land. Days blurred together, dust storms, blistering heat, nights of cold so deep it cut to the bone. Clara tried to hate Ethan, tried to remind herself he had bought her like she was nothing but a possession, but the truth complicated her anger. He never touched her without cause. He never spoke a word meant to belittle or claim her. He kept his distance, though his presence loomed like a shield she hadn't asked for. It was Jacob who broke through her walls first. The boy offered her pieces of dried apple, a sip from his canteen, even the little horse he treasured more than anything. "You can hold him if you want," he said one night, the firelight flickering across his small face. Clara shook her head, unwilling to show softness, but the kindness lingered in her chest long after he'd fallen asleep. On the fourth night, Clara finally spoke beyond sharp retorts. She sat across from the fire, the flames painting her face with restless shadows. "My father built our house with his own hands," she said, suddenly her voice low. "He planted the wheat, tended the horses, cut the boards. My mother kept it alive, and I let it all burn." Ethan looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "You didn't let it. Men with no soul did." Her gaze flicked to him, bitter. "And where were you when it happened? Where was anyone?" The silence stretched. Jacob stirred in his sleep, murmuring softly. Ethan set down the knife. His voice, when it came, was even but heavy. "Burying my wife. Fever took her. Left me with the boy, and a grave I visit when I can stand to." Clara's throat tightened. She had not expected him to carry grief of his own. For the first time, she saw him not as the man who had bought her, but as someone who knew what it was to lose a world. The next day, a storm swept across the plains without warning. Wind howled like a chorus of demons, tearing at their clothes, driving dust into their eyes. Rain followed, sudden and brutal, swelling the dry riverbeds into torrents. They sought shelter in the rocks, but the river rose too fast. Jacob slipped, his small body tumbling toward the churning water. Clara screamed, lunging forward, but Ethan was faster. He dove, catching the boy's arm, his boots sliding in the mud. For a terrifying moment, both father and son teetered on the edge, the current roaring below. Clara threw herself down, grasping Ethan's coat, pulling with all her strength. Together, they dragged Jacob back to safety. Ethan collapsed, gasping. Jacob clutched against his chest. Clara's hands shook as she touched the boy's wet hair, her breath ragged. Ethan looked up at her, mud streaking his face, and for a heartbeat their eyes locked. Something unspoken passed between them, gratitude, fear, the beginning of trust neither wanted to admit. That night, as the storm raged around their meager shelter, Clara sat close to the fire, her body aching. She glanced at Ethan, who sat with his arm around Jacob, both of them damp but alive. Her voice was barely audible over the wind. "Why me? Why spend every coin you had for me?" Ethan stared into the flames. His answer was quiet, almost lost to the storm. "Because I couldn't lose another soul to this world." The words lodged deep in Clara's chest. She turned away, unwilling to let him see the way they shook her. Yet even as she lay down, staring into the darkness, she knew the walls she'd built were cracking. When dawn broke, the storm had passed, leaving the land scrubbed raw and clean. They stepped out into a world glistening with rain, every blade of grass jeweled with water. Clara walked beside them. Silent, her thoughts tangled. She still carried her anger, her grief, her mistrust, but something else had taken root, small and stubborn as a wild flower in the cracks of stone. Her journey was no longer just about survival. Against her will, it was becoming something more. The land stretched endless before them, dry ridges breaking into deep canyons, the horizon a jagged scar against the fading sky. Weeks had passed since the storm, weeks in which Clara had come to measure each day, not by the weight of grief alone, but by the strength she discovered still burning inside her. She walked now without chains, her steps steady beside Ethan and Jacob. Yet shadows clung to her thoughts. At night, she still saw her father falling, her mother's body crumpling, the flames devouring all she had known. The raiders had not vanished. Evil never did. It circled like a wolf, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment came at dusk. They had made camp in a narrow canyon, firelight flickering against red stone walls. Jacob was tracing shapes in the dirt with his little wooden horse when Clara heard it. The faint echo of hooves, more than one, masked by distance but growing closer. Her body stiffened. Ethan's eyes lifted from the fire. He reached for his rifle without a word. The riders appeared as silhouettes at the canyon's mouth, half a dozen at first, then more. The same red scarves, the same cruel laughter carried on the dry wind. Clara's breath caught. She had prayed she would never see them again. Yet here they were, riding straight into her nightmares. Ethan rose to his full height, calm though his knuckles were white on the rifle's stock. "Take the boy and get low," he told her, voice even, eyes locked on the advancing threat. Clara hesitated. Her instinct screamed to run, but another voice, quieter yet stronger, told her she could not turn away again. She pulled Jacob close, shielding him behind a boulder. The boy clutched her with trembling arms, but his wide eyes looked to her for courage. She gave him what she could, though her heart hammered like a drum. The raiders dismounted, fanning out, rifles raised. Their leader stepped forward, tall and lean, the firelight glinting off a scar that split his cheek. Clara recognized his eyes instantly, the same that had dragged her from a burning home. "Well, look what we found," he sneered. "The girl who slipped away, and the fool who thought he could buy her freedom." Ethan leveled his rifle. "You leave, or you won't leave at all." The canyon held its breath. Then the crack of a shot split the air. Dust leapt at Ethan's feet. Chaos erupted. Gunfire thundered, echoing against stone. Ethan fired back, dropping one raider where he stood. Clara pressed Jacob close, the child burying his face in her side. She wanted to shrink, to disappear into the rock, but she forced herself to lift her head. Ethan was outnumbered, bullets sparking off stone around him, and though his aim was steady, she saw what he already knew. He could not hold them all. Her eyes fell on the rifle lying near the supplies, abandoned when the first shot rang out. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, every part of her screaming that she was no fighter, that she was just a farmer's daughter. But another voice rose louder, one born of fire and loss. She grabbed the weapon, the wood rough against her palms. Jacob's small hand clutched at her skirt. "Don't go," he whispered. Clara met his eyes, steadying her breath. "I have to." She rose from cover, rifle braced awkwardly against her shoulder. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to the memory of her father teaching her to sight at target against fence posts, his voice patient, steady. She swallowed hard, lined up the nearest raider, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil jolted her back, but the man fell, his weapon clattering to the ground. Ethan glanced back, surprise flickering across his face, quickly replaced by grim approval. "Good," he shouted. "Again." Clara fired again, the shot wild, grazing stone, but it forced another raider back. The tide shifted. Where Ethan had stood alone, now they stood together. The battle raged on. Bullets carved sparks from stone, smoke stung her eyes, and the air was thick with the metallic tang of blood. Clara's body shook, but she did not stop. Each shot was fueled by the faces of her parents, by the fire that had stolen her world. She would not be their victim again. At last, silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire. Bodies lay scattered in the dust, some groaning, most still. The leader remained, crouched behind a boulder, blood dripping from his arm. His voice rose, raw with fury. "You'll never keep her, Cole. She'll always belong to us." Ethan moved to finish it, but Clara stepped forward, rifle steady in her hands. Her voice cut like steel. "I belong to my family, and you took them from me. But you'll take nothing more." The man sneered, but in his eyes flickered something she had not seen before, fear. Clara pulled the trigger. The shot echoed sharp, final. His body crumpled to the dust. The canyon was still again. Clara's chest heaved, the rifle slipping from her hands. She stood trembling, not from weakness, but from the weight of what she had done. Ethan lowered his rifle, his eyes on her. There was no pity there, only respect. Jacob ran to her, clutching her waist, his small voice breaking through the silence. "You saved us." Clara knelt, gathering him close, her eyes stinging. She looked over his head at Ethan, who was watching her with quiet intensity. Something had shifted, something unspoken but undeniable. They were no longer strangers bound by circumstance. They were survivors bound by fire and blood. When dawn touched the canyon walls, they buried the dead beneath cairns of stone. The land was silent, as though it, too, had witnessed their struggle and now offered its respect. Clara stood over the graves, her hair stirred by the wind. She felt grief, yes, but also something else, strength, fierce and new. She had fought. She had chosen. She had survived. Ethan joined her, his hat in his hands. "You've got more grit than most men I've known," he said quietly. Clara looked at him, her voice steady. "I won't be bought again. Not by you, not by anyone." His expression didn't falter. "You're free to walk your road. Always were. But if you choose to walk with us, we'd be the better for it." Jacob slipped his hand into hers, his wooden horse pressed into her palm. She held it, the carved edges rough against her skin, a symbol of innocence, of hope, of a family not lost but perhaps found anew. Clara gazed out over the canyon, the horizon wide and unforgiving. The world had taken everything from her, yet here she stood, unbroken, the fire in her heart refusing to die. Maybe she could not reclaim the world she had lost. But maybe, with these two, she could build another. The wind carried the ashes of yesterday into the distance, and Clara walked forward, her steps no longer those of a captive, but of a woman who had claimed her own fate.